There's a quiet ache that settles into your bones when the people you gave everything to start treating you like a stranger in your own life. It doesn't happen all at once. No, it's far more cunning than that. It drips into your days like cold rain through a crack in the ceiling. A missed phone call here, an excuse not to visit there, until one day you're no longer the mother they confided in, cooked for, leaned on. You're the outsider, the inconvenience, the afterthought. Welcome, dear listener. If this finds you while you're sitting alone in a quiet house or perhaps doing laundry for people who never say thank you anymore, know that you're not alone. I invite you to walk beside me for the next few minutes. Let your heart be seen here. And if this story stirs something in you, pain, recognition, even hope, take a moment to tap the like button, leave a comment with where you're listening from, or subscribe to this channel for more stories that hold space for voices like ours. You're part of this family now, and families, real ones, listen. My name is Nora, and I'm a 69-year-old widow living in a small craftsman-style home in Savannah, Georgia, where the shutters are as weathered as my patience, and the air smells faintly of magnolia and cedar most evenings. The house creaks and sighs like it remembers everything before I do. My late husband's voice echoing down the hall, our Sunday morning breakfasts, even the soft patter of our son's toddler feet as he chased the family dog around the table. My husband, Harold, passed away last year. It was lung cancer, unexpected and fast, like being struck by lightning in the middle of a sunny afternoon. One minute he was trimming the hedges, and the next we were meeting with hospice nurses who spoke in soft voices and used words like comfort plan and quality of life. He was gone in 4 months, and I was left with this house full of ghosts and a son who, at first, promised he'd be there for me. His name is Ethan, my only child, my miracle baby. I had him late when I was 38, after years of painful silence and failed attempts. I poured everything into him, my youth, my savings, my attention. He was the kind of boy who used to draw me pictures that said, "World's best mom," even when he was in middle school and too cool to say it out loud. And when he met Madison, I was genuinely happy. She was polished, confident, and always polite. A little cold, maybe, but I chalked that up to nerves. I wanted to love her because she loved Ethan, or at least that's what I told myself. But slowly, Ethan became someone else. It started subtly. He'd check his phone while I was talking, leave early from our lunches. Then came the missed birthdays, the visits that were just too hard to squeeze in. Madison always had a reason: work, her sister's baby shower, a destination wedding. Ethan just went along. I could feel him slipping through my fingers, but I didn't know how to hold on without pushing him further away. So when Ethan called me a few months ago and said they were planning a family vacation to Lake Como, yes, Italy, I was stunned. Not because they were going somewhere extravagant, but because of how he said it, cheerfully. Like we were still close. He even mentioned how I'd always wanted to go somewhere beautiful. And maybe this could be a way to honor Dad's memory, since he and I never got the chance to travel much. My heart soared. For the first time in over a year, I felt included again, like family. He said they were still finalizing plans, but they'd love for me to be there. Madison had found this stunning lakeside villa, and they were inviting a small group, just 10 people. I offered to help. I had the money, and I figured, what better use for it than something like this? A memory we could all share. I told him I'd cover the villa. It was my way of contributing, of being part of something again. He said, "Wow, Mom, that would mean a lot." So I transferred the funds. I paid for the villa, nearly $13,000, and sent him the receipt, along with a little smiley face emoji. It felt good, like I was doing something meaningful. 2 weeks later, the text came. It was a Tuesday morning. I was watering the hanging ivy in the front porch, humming along to an old jazz tune on the radio. My phone buzzed in my apron pocket. I pulled it out, thinking it might be a picture of the villa or an itinerary. Instead, it was a message from Ethan. "Hey, Mom, about the Italy trip. Maddie and I talked, and we think it might be best if you sat this one out. She really wants to keep it just family this time. I hope you understand. Just family. Just family. I stared at those two words like they were written in fire, as if I hadn't spent the last 4 decades being his everything, as if I hadn't just paid for the very roof they'd be sleeping under, as if I wasn't family anymore. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I didn't even reply, not right away. Instead, I walked inside, sat at the edge of Harold's old recliner, and stared out the window at the roses we planted together. My hand trembled slightly, the phone still clutched in my palm like a betrayal I hadn't yet decided to face. The next day, I got a group photo from Ethan. They were already in Italy. Madison was in the front, holding a wine glass and flashing a perfectly filtered smile. Ethan was beside her, his arm around her shoulders. Behind them were her parents, her brother, her sister-in-law. All smiles, all family. I was never told the dates had been moved up. I had never been given the itinerary. They had left without a word, without me. And that's when it happened. The shift. Not in them. In me. I stood up, walked to the drawer where I kept all my important papers, and opened the folder labeled Trust. I flipped through the documents until I found the one titled Transfer of Ownership. Lake Como Property Rental. And I whispered to myself, let's see who really gets to enjoy this trip. Because when a mother is betrayed so completely, there's only so much silence she can carry before she starts to speak with action. And I was done being quiet. I suppose if you asked my younger self what motherhood would feel like in my late 60s, I would have painted a picture far more romantic than reality. I'd imagined gentle Sunday brunches with my son and his family, the clatter of dishes, grandbabies crawling beneath the table, the scent of cinnamon rolls filling the kitchen like they did when Ethan was little. I never imagined sitting alone at the kitchen table, staring at a cold cup of tea, while my thoughts traveled in bitter loops trying to understand how things unraveled so completely. In the days following Ethan's text and that group photo, I found myself haunted by memories that suddenly felt hollow. I remembered his first sleepover, how he insisted I leave the light on in the hallway. I remembered the years I worked overtime just so he could have the sneakers all the other kids wore, the field trips I chaperoned even when I was sick, the way I held him through every heartbreak from middle school crushes to college rejections. It felt like each of those sacrifices now lived inside a stranger's body. Harold and I weren't rich, but we were resourceful. We built our lives on modesty and intention. He was a high school music teacher and I worked as a librarian. We didn't vacation often, but when we did, we saved meticulously. We valued handwritten cards over store-bought gifts, and the only heirloom we truly passed down to Ethan was love, consistency, and the small house we worked our entire adult lives to pay off. When Harold died, he left behind more than grief. He left behind a responsibility that felt heavier than ever, to hold the pieces of our family together. I tried. Truly I did. I baked his favorite pies every Thanksgiving even though he stopped coming. I sent birthday cards to Madison with gift cards tucked inside, hoping maybe, just maybe, that little gesture might warm her to me. But it never seemed to matter. The distance was always palpable. Still, I held out hope, because that's what mothers do. We hope long past reason. After Harold's passing, I found myself quietly trying to forge a new relationship with Ethan, more adult to adult than mother and child. I thought the vacation might be that bridge. When he mentioned Lake Como, my heart danced at the thought of laughter echoing off the water, of shared meals under warm Italian skies. I saw us reconnecting, maybe even mourning Harold together in a place so breathtaking it might make the grief feel sacred instead of suffocating. So I offered to pay, not just to be generous, but to belong again, and yet I was excluded, bought out of belonging with my own money. After that text, I didn't call Ethan, I didn't send another message, but I did open my laptop. I pulled up the booking receipt, read every clause, every cancellation policy, and realized something interesting. The villa was reserved in my name, with my payment details, and included a clause about primary guest authorization. I was technically the legal primary, and though I didn't yet know what I would do with that information, it sat in my mind like a seed waiting for the right storm to sprout. In the meantime, I returned to a rhythm that felt both comforting and empty. Mornings began with coffee and silence. I read novels I'd once recommended to Ethan as a teenager. I tended my garden, the one Harold used to claim looked more like a jungle than a flower bed. And sometimes I'd scroll through Ethan's social media, quietly watching as he posted scenic photos from Italy. His captions breezy, his smiles wide, his life fully in motion without me. One evening, I noticed something peculiar in a post, a location tag at a different hotel, not the villa. I clicked through the photos and realized none of them showed the villa I had booked. My breath caught in my chest. Had something gone wrong? Or had Ethan made a mistake? The next day, I received a voicemail from the villa owner. A man with a thick Italian accent explained, "Signora Nora, we have situation. Guests arrive, but we cannot check in. Reservation is under your name. We need authorization immediately." My heart thudded in my chest. They were standing at the gates of a property they believed they owned for the week, with matching luggage and probably a wine tasting scheduled by sunset. But they couldn't enter, because they needed me. I didn't respond. Not then. I sat with that power. Let it linger in my palms like a weight I never thought I'd carry. The same woman who was deemed not family was now the only one with the key. That night, I slept with the windows open. The Georgia air was thick with heat and jasmine, but I felt something unfamiliar coursing through me, agency. I realized that, for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel invisible. I felt seen. Not by Ethan or Madison, but by myself. The next morning, I finally called the villa owner. I apologized for the delay, explained that I would be canceling the reservation effective immediately, and requested a refund per the policy since the guests were unauthorized. It was processed within the hour. Then I sent Ethan a message. Just 3 lines. "I heard the check-in didn't go as planned. I hope the hotel is comfortable. Thank you for reminding me where I stand." I blocked his number after that. The truth is, I wasn't trying to be petty. I was reclaiming something, a boundary, a voice, a sense of self-respect that had been quietly chipped away over the years with every missed invitation, every passive-aggressive comment from Madison, every instance of being told to be grateful for crumbs when I'd spent a lifetime baking the whole damn pie. I still loved my son. That much hadn't changed, but I was done. Loving him in ways that left me empty. And the world? It didn't end. In fact, something began. I signed up for a watercolor class at the local community center. I started volunteering again at the library downtown, and I went to the travel agency near Forsyth Park and picked up a brochure for river cruises through France. I figured if I was going to be invisible to my family, I might as well be surrounded by strangers who served good cheese and called me Madame. Some nights, I still cry. Grief doesn't vanish just because you find your footing, but now, those tears are for Harold, for the little boy Ethan used to be, and sometimes for the woman I had to bury inside myself just to keep the peace for so many years, but not anymore. Now I was learning what peace truly meant, and it had nothing to do with silence. I spent the next few weeks balancing between a subtle ache that gripped me at random hours and a newfound clarity that lit a quiet flame in my chest. The fallout from canceling the villa unfolded behind a closed door I no longer felt obligated to open. Ethan never called. Madison certainly didn't either, and I didn't chase answers that had already humiliated me enough. But silence has its own voice, and sometimes what people don't say is louder than any scream. I began to reflect on how far I'd let things spiral. It wasn't about the villa. Not really. It wasn't even about the message or the exclusion. It was about the years I'd been steadily erased, chipped away not with cruelty, but with calculated indifference. And the most bitter part was realizing that I had enabled it. I had allowed their version of respect to be rationed out like scraps, while I quietly hoped that love might follow. One rainy morning, while organizing the bottom shelf of my hall closet, I found an old box labeled Ethan. It was filled with the little remnants of his growing years, his first baby shoes, the macaroni necklace he'd made in kindergarten, his third-grade report card where Mrs. Hollis had written, "Ethan is wonderfully thoughtful. Always includes others." I sat on the carpet and held that card for what felt like forever. I wasn't crying. I wasn't angry. I was grieving, not just for the boy in that classroom, but for the mother I used to be, the one who believed that love meant always giving without asking for anything in return, the one who thought that being selfless was the highest form of motherhood. But I'd learned the hard way that there is a thin, sharp line between selfless and invisible. Later that week, I received a letter in the mail. Not a message, not a call, but a printed letter. The envelope was pale blue, and the handwriting was Madison's, perfectly symmetrical, cold, controlled. I stood at the kitchen counter, the morning sun glinting off the rim of my coffee mug, and read it in silence. Nora, we were deeply disappointed by what you did in Italy. It was humiliating to arrive and be turned away after all the effort Ethan and I put into planning the trip. Regardless of who paid for it, it was meant to be a bonding time for our new family dynamic. You made a statement that felt vindictive. That being said, we hope you understand that if you want to be part of our lives, especially when children come into the picture, you'll need to reconsider how you respond to conflict. We're open to rebuilding trust, but only if you're willing to acknowledge that what you did was inappropriate. Madison. Not a single word about the original message. Not one apology for the exclusion. No recognition of the humiliation I had endured. Instead, the letter was a carefully veiled demand for compliance, a lesson wrapped in condescension. I didn't respond. I folded the letter neatly and placed it in the back of my recipe box, behind the card for Harold's favorite beef stew. Then I poured myself another cup of coffee and opened the laptop. It was time to make changes that weren't just emotional, but legal. I logged into the platform where I'd set up my living will. Ethan was still listed as my power of attorney, my healthcare proxy, and the sole inheritor of my assets, including the house. My entire estate had been built from mine and Harold's savings, our pension plans, our little investments over the years. And yet here I was, watching it slowly being treated like a family bank account rather than a legacy of love. I removed him from every document. I added the local library as a beneficiary to a portion of my estate. I redirected my small trust to a scholarship for underprivileged music students, something Harold would have adored. And the house? That beautiful old cottage in Savannah with its creaky floors and the scent of jasmine that poured through the open windows each spring. It was going into a trust with stipulations. No one would own it unless they earned it. I hired a lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Carla, who had a voice like steel wrapped in silk. She helped me set up every paper trail, every clause, and every protection I needed. I explained my situation once, and she simply said, "We're going to make sure your legacy can't be hijacked by entitlement." With each notarized document, I felt something lifting inside me. One afternoon, while dropping off documents, I passed a coffee shop where a woman about my age sat by the window laughing. Something about her reminded me of who I used to be. Someone light, someone unworried. I wondered what it felt like to have family who chose you, not out of obligation but out of love. I wasn't alone in this pain. That realization landed quietly, but it offered unexpected comfort. Later that evening, as I sat on my porch and watched the sun bleed orange across the horizon, my neighbor Jo stopped by with lemon bars. Her daughter had just visited, she said. "Can you believe she cleaned my whole fridge without me asking?" Jo laughed, and I laughed too. though the sound felt foreign in my mouth, but it was real. And it made me realize something even more profound. I had given my entire emotional life to people who barely noticed I was standing in the room. I had waited, year after year, for scraps of affection. And now, in their absence, I was rediscovering the weight and worth of my own company. No, I wouldn't be writing Madison back, and no, I wouldn't be trying to apologize just to smooth the edges. I had done enough bending. What was coming next would require more than words. It would require truth. And I was finally ready to speak it. The days turned to weeks, and while the silence between us remained firm, the tension inside me began to crystallize into something sharper, something with edges. I didn't feel bitter, not anymore. I felt focused. I had spent so long shrinking myself to fit into the narrow roles Ethan and Madison had created for me. Quiet benefactor, convenient caretaker, forgotten grandmother-to-be, that now, on the other side of that confinement, I could feel my lungs expand. I could feel myself becoming something larger, something whole. The house had never been more peaceful. Sunlight filled the kitchen through those large bay windows that Harold once insisted we install, saying every home needed a soft place for morning coffee and hard thoughts. I'd sit there some mornings with a pen in hand, writing out what I wished I had said to Ethan years ago. Not out of regret. No, that ship had long sailed, but out of catharsis. Because sometimes the heart heals, not by receiving apology, but by speaking truth. One afternoon, while filing old tax papers, I came across a yellowed envelope tucked inside a folder labeled 2004. It was from Harold, a letter I hadn't seen in years, maybe forgotten entirely. He had written it the day before his surgery, just in case. His handwriting was a little shaky, but unmistakably his. Nora, if you're reading this, I didn't make it. But don't you dare be sad for too long. You've carried this family on your back for decades, sacrificed more than any of us could count. If there's anything left for you in this life, I hope it's peace. And I hope, wherever you go next, you walk in like you belong, because you always have. I love you. I held the letter to my chest for a long while. That note, yellowed and fragile, told me what I needed to hear more than anything Ethan had said in years. I did belong, not in their small world of selective affection and obligations, but in the bigger story of my own making. It was time to step into that story without fear. The opportunity came quicker than I expected. Jo, my neighbor, invited me to her granddaughter's baby shower, and while I hesitated at first, after all, I hadn't been surrounded by warmth in so long, it turned out to be one of the most healing afternoons I'd had in years. Everyone knew someone like me, a woman whose children had slowly pushed her aside, replaced her with spouses who saw her as competition, not kin. The stories echoed mine, like a familiar tune. Forgotten birthdays, unreturned calls, sudden exclusions from family gatherings. One woman, Lila, told me her son stopped speaking to her after she refused to co-sign a loan for his wife's boutique. She said I didn't believe in her dreams, Lila murmured, tears lining her eyes. But no one asked me about the dream I gave up when I put their needs before mine. We cried together. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with that quiet grief only mothers understand, when the babies we raised grow into strangers who don't look back. Later that evening, as I sat on my porch, wrapped in a shawl Harold had once given me, a car pulled into my driveway. I froze. It wasn't Jo, and it wasn't the mailman. It was Ethan. He stepped out slowly, the kind of slow that means uncertainty. His hands were shoved deep into his coat pockets, and he stood there for a moment, scanning the yard like he barely recognized it. When he finally walked up, I stayed seated. I didn't stand. I didn't run to the door like I used to. I simply waited calmly. "Mom," he said quietly. I nodded. "Ethan." I didn't mean for things to get so out of hand. I raised an eyebrow. "Is that so?" He swallowed. Madison was upset about the trip. She felt blindsided. Madison felt blindsided? I asked, my voice even but cold. After I paid for a trip I wasn't invited to? He winced. It was a misunderstanding. I let the silence linger between us. He shifted uncomfortably, like he expected me to rescue him from it like I used to, but I didn't. I came to talk, he said, and to ask if maybe we could find a way back. Now, that was a sentence heavy with irony. Back to what? To the years I sat through dinners pretending I didn't notice Madison cutting me off mid-sentence? Back to being left out of family photos? To paying for down payments and nursery remodels and being thanked with a group text? Number. There was no way back, only forward. You and Madison chose a path, I said slowly, and I accepted that, but I've chosen mine too. His brows drew together. What does that mean? It means, I said, rising finally from my seat, that the house is no longer in your future, nor is the inheritance, nor is my obligation to apologize for protecting myself. He looked stunned. Wait, you changed the will. I changed everything. But Mom, I was your mother when it mattered, when you needed food, when you needed shelter, when your dreams needed scaffolding, and I still am. But I'm also a woman who will not spend the last chapters of her life begging for respect from her own child. He looked like a boy again then, just for a moment, like the boy who broke his arm jumping from the porch railing and cried into my shoulder. But that boy had grown into a man who forgot who caught him. I didn't think you'd go this far, he said softly. That's the problem, I replied. You never thought I could. He left that night without another word, and I watched the taillights disappear into the dark. I didn't cry, not because I wasn't hurt, but because something had shifted in me again, this time deeper, more final. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about anger anymore. It was about boundaries. It was about reclaiming the space I had once given away so freely, believing it would be honored. It was about finally understanding that love, without respect, is just guilt with a ribbon on top. The days following Ethan's visit were oddly calm, but not in the way peace usually feels. It was more like the quiet of a storm's eye, where everything seems still but carries the pressure of something unresolved pressing from the edges. I moved through my home with sharper awareness. Like every drawer I opened, every framed photograph I dusted, held a truth I hadn't fully embraced before. This house wasn't just where I had built a life with Harold, it was where I had lost pieces of myself over the years without noticing. And now, I was slowly gathering those pieces back. Joe came over with lemon tea and a basket of cranberry muffins 2 days after Ethan's visit. She didn't ask what had happened. She didn't have to. She simply sat across from me on the porch, knitting needles clicking lightly in her lap, and waited. There's a sacred kind of friendship in that silence, the kind that holds space without demanding to fill it. He came by, I finally said. Joe looked up briefly, her eyes knowing. He wanted to talk, said it was a misunderstanding. Joe snorted gently, not unkindly. Funny how misunderstandings seem to happen right around the time consequences start showing up. I smiled at that. He was shocked. About the will. About the house. Let him be, she said, tying off a row. It's about time someone in your life learned how much you actually held up. That night, I walked into my bedroom and pulled open the small cedar chest at the foot of the bed. Inside were decades of letters, birth certificates, school photos, a tiny pair of shoes with Harold's handwriting on the soles. First steps, keep going. I ran my fingers across them slowly, thinking about all the moments I had invested in building a legacy I believed would stand taller than hurt feelings or fading respect. But legacy, I was realizing, wasn't about inheritance or assets or names on deeds. It was about dignity, and I was finally learning how to protect mine. The next morning, I got a call from Madison. I nearly didn't pick up. Her name on the screen alone tightened something in my chest, but curiosity, or maybe just habit, led me to answer. Her tone was clipped, polite on the surface, but with that undeniable edge she always wore when she was trying to keep control. "Hi, Nora. I think we need to clear the air." I let the silence stretch. She continued, "I know Ethan came by. I don't know what he said exactly, but I think we're all just feeling the stress. The baby, the move, the wedding trip. It's been a lot." A part of me wanted to laugh. How quickly she bundled betrayal into the same bag as wedding planning and baby showers, like my exclusion had simply slipped through the cracks during a busy season. "I understand things have been hectic," I said carefully, "but a text that disinvites me from a trip I paid for? That wasn't stress. That was intention." There was a pause. "I think we all just need to move forward," she said eventually, and then added, "You're still going to help with the nursery, right?" And there it was, the true reason behind the call. I could almost hear her glance at the registry, calculating what was still unchecked, what she assumed I'd step in to cover. Madison didn't want peace. She wanted provision. "I think," I said slowly, "that Ethan and I need to rebuild something before we talk about paint swatches and cribs." She bristled. I could hear it in her breath, in the pause that followed. "Well," she said sharply, "I guess we'll have to manage." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "Yes, I suppose you will." After I hung up, I stood by the window watching the wind move through the old oak tree in the front yard. Harold once tied a tire swing there for Ethan when he was 5. The rope was long gone, but the memory lingered in the bark, in the soil, in me. I wasn't trying to punish them. That thought had kept circling in my mind, like a bird unsure whether to land. I wasn't doing this out of vengeance. I wasn't trying to get even. I was simply refusing to be used. And for a woman like Madison, who had grown accustomed to transactional love, that probably looked like punishment. Later that week, I took my morning coffee to the porch and found a small envelope taped to the door. Inside was a photograph of the nursery, the one I'd offered to help decorate. Bare walls, an unassembled crib, and a caption in Madison's handwriting. "This could have been yours to build." I stared at it for a long moment. Then I tore it in half and fed it to the fire pit. Somewhere along the way, I had started confusing access with love. I thought being included meant I was wanted, but what they really wanted was my wallet, my time, my silence, and the more I gave, the less I existed as anything other than a utility. That weekend, I hosted a small dinner at my house. Joe came, and Lila, and 2 other women from the community center. We laughed, we ate, we shared stories of children who no longer called and partners who had passed but still felt present in the creak of stairs or the scent of a familiar cologne. I looked around that table and saw women who had rebuilt entire identities after being erased by people they once nurtured, and it hit me like a wave. I wasn't alone. I never really had been. The next morning, I mailed an updated copy of the will to my lawyer. I had added 2 clauses. First, a donation in Harold's name to the local library to fund a reading room for women rebuilding their lives after family loss or estrangement. Second, a clause that the house, if ever sold, would contribute 50% of its value to the same program. I smiled as I signed the papers. Ethan and Madison might have erased me from their family vacations and group chats, but I had found a new way to write myself back into a story, this time one I was proud of. And somewhere I hoped Harold was watching, whispering with a smile, "Keep going." A few weeks passed after I finalized the changes to the will. The summer days grew longer, and with each golden sunrise that filtered through my bedroom curtains, I found myself more grounded in this quiet, unfamiliar peace. It wasn't joy exactly, not yet, but it was something sturdy, something that wrapped itself around my shoulders like a well-worn quilt stitched with threads of clarity and acceptance. Ethan hadn't called again, and surprisingly, neither had Madison. At first, I checked my phone constantly, thinking surely they'd follow up, ask questions, or try to negotiate the new terms. But nothing came. And that silence, which once would have felt like rejection, began to feel like a gift. I no longer lived on the edge of their moods or expectations. I was finally living in the center of my own story. I filled my days with simple things, tending to the roses Harold had planted along the fence line, volunteering twice a week at the community library, and hosting small dinners where laughter echoed through my kitchen like it used to when Ethan was little and full of boundless wonder instead of bitter entitlement. One Wednesday morning, while sorting through some old photos for a memory display at the library, I found a picture of Ethan and me. He must have been 7 or 8, his arm wrapped around my neck, both of us grinning with ice cream-stained mouths. I stared at it for a long time, and for the first time in weeks, I let the grief come. It wasn't about the house or the money or even the text that had sliced through my heart like a blade. It was about the boy in the photo, the one who once asked me to sit by his bed during thunderstorms because he felt safest when I was near. I missed that child, and I mourned the man he had become. But mourning, I was learning, didn't mean surrendering. It meant honoring what once was without allowing it to control what could still be. One afternoon, Joe and I were seated on my porch, sipping iced tea as cicadas buzzed lazily in the trees. She was updating me on the latest drama in her bridge club when she paused mid-sentence and nodded toward the street. "Isn't that Ethan's car?" My heart kicked, and I turned slowly. Sure enough, Ethan's SUV pulled into the drive, the engine humming for a few seconds before shutting off. The door opened, and he stepped out alone, looking tired and older than I remembered. He held something in his hands, a photo album wrapped in brown paper. Joe squeezed my hand once and quietly slipped inside, giving me space. Ethan climbed the porch steps slowly. "Hi, Mom." I nodded. "Ethan." He glanced around as if seeing the house for the first time in years. "Looks the same." It does. A silence stretched between us before he extended the wrapped item. "I found this in the attic. Thought you might want it." I took it without a word, setting it on the table between us. "I've been thinking," he continued, his voice softer than I expected, "about everything." I waited. "I messed up," he said finally. I let things get too far. I thought I was being a good husband, keeping the peace, but I wasn't being a good son." I didn't speak. I wasn't ready to make it easy for him. That time had passed. He rubbed his face, looking down at his shoes. "You didn't deserve that text, or any of it. I got so used to you always being there. I forgot you didn't have to be." That struck something deep. "I guess," I said quietly, "you thought I'd never stop giving." He nodded. "Yeah, I did." I looked at him fully then, not as my son, not as the boy in the picture, but as a man trying to face the wreckage of his own choices. And in that moment, I realized something important. Forgiveness wasn't about excusing what had happened. It was about releasing myself from the need to keep reliving it. "I don't know what comes next," I said honestly, "but I'm not going back to what was." He nodded again. "I wouldn't ask you to." We sat there a while longer, not speaking, just breathing in the same air for the first time in what felt like years. Eventually, he stood. "Thank you." "For listening," I nodded. "Take care of your family, Ethan, but don't forget you came from one too." He gave a small, sad smile. "I won't." As his car pulled away, I didn't feel triumphant or vindicated. I felt whole, because standing up for myself hadn't severed our bond. It had simply revealed the parts of it that were worth keeping and the parts that had to be rebuilt. That night, I sat on the porch again, album in my lap. I flipped through pages of birthdays, camping trips, handprint turkeys from kindergarten, and I smiled, because even if the future with Ethan remained uncertain, I had finally reclaimed something precious, my voice, my boundaries, and my peace. If you're still here, Thank you for walking this road with me. Maybe you've stood in a similar silence, holding your breath for someone to choose you, and maybe they didn't. But you are still worthy. Your love still mattered. And your story, just like mine, is far from over. If this story touched your heart, take a quiet moment to like, comment, or share it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you're new here, I'd love to have you stay. Hit subscribe and join me for more stories that remind us we're not alone, no matter what life throws our way. Until next time, Nora.